Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us this amazing Thursday afternoon on this amazing digital platform. Thank you for making time for this. We have an amazing discussion lined up for you. My name is Baraka Mora from Qhala. I'll be introducing a bit of the team later, but for now, I'm going to hand over to Patrick Karanja, who's a program partner of digital economy at the Mastercard Foundation, and he can give us a bit of a background on what's happening today. But before then, Nasubo, do you want to say something?
It was clear. The others which were paid, the money was held. Have they opened it up?
Hi, good morning all. Good afternoon. Morning for people who are in a different time zone. Thank you very much for joining us. As Baraka has mentioned, my name is Nasubo. I am a researcher at Qhala, and I'll just invite Patrick to just introduce the awesome team and then talk about how the project came to be. And yeah, welcome, Patrick.
Thank you, Nasubo. Thank you, Baraka, for the invitation. And I'm really honored today to be joining a great team of panelists and in this event of launching the Platform Livelihoods report. I'll start by introducing where we come from. The Mastercard Foundation, as you all know, is really interested in the digital economy, specifically in how digital economy enables young people secure or access opportunities for work consistent with the Young Africa strategy, which I'll talk about later. But today we are here to celebrate the launch of a report that was carried out by our partner Caribou Digital. I know they're in the audience, so because this is virtual, I'll just wave in the, I'll do salamu for the Kenyan, salamu za hewa to Caribou Digital. A shout out to Caribou Digital for the work that she did. And our partnership Caribou Digital has actually been for more than 5 years. I think it's 7 years now. And it's involved getting and gaining an understanding of the digital economy, understanding how young people interact and engage the digital economy. What are the dynamics that come about with the digital economy? And in this respect, it's for purposes of being able to not only understand, but document and curate this in a way that is usable by multiple stakeholders, not just for the foundation. Today, we see one great partnership that Caribou is really intentional with, which is the Qhala team. Qhala is a Kenyan team, and I know Shiko will explain more about Qhala, but we celebrate that Caribou partnership allows local partners, those who have the best experiences and engagements and networks in their context, to be able to surface and to be partners who can help surface these insights. And this is one such collaboration, an example of how we go about understanding really from the ground what are the dynamics that involve the digital economy. This specific report was drawn out of a commitment to understand these experiences, both positive but also insights that may need to be addressed, the challenges and the barriers that prevent young people being productively engaged. It's been a process for the team, and it is part of a series of research pieces, as I shared earlier, with the partnership Caribou. But today, we want to specifically look at Kenya as a case study. The report captures a couple of sectors, and in this respect, I think the Mastercard Foundation is really pleased and honored that we will be in this session. I will not take much more of your time. I know we have a part that is more than able to explain and express the experiences as practitioners, but also that we are expecting you all to engage us, to ask questions, insights, comments about your either involvement in the report, with the report, or what you'll be getting from this session. A quick note that we are live on Facebook and YouTube, and we are recording this, so the comments and the discussions here may be and will be used for public use. I think from that point onwards, I'll hand it back to Nasubo, and welcome. Asanteni sana.
Thank you, Patrick, for that really interesting introduction to our partnership. And I'll let Shiko take over from here. Shiko?
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from wherever in the globe you're joining us from. We are really, really excited about the launch of this study. It's been a year plus in the making. We started talking about this in December of 2019. We had hoped to start in March of 2020, and then COVID hit. But it also helped us understand this particular topic much better, because COVID did accelerate the uptake of digital work and platform livelihoods. So we're really, really excited. We're excited about this partnership with Caribou Digital. It has been an exciting piece of work, and it's still continuing. We are in the middle of 2 other studies as we speak. And the study, it's called Platform Livelihoods, because it's basically looking at pathways and opportunities and vulnerability in digital work. And digital work is what some people call gig work, but Platform Livelihoods is much, much more than just gig work. It's the trading and selling of services and products using digital means. That's the simplest way of describing it. We have a much more deeper description in the report. That is a reason for why you should go and read it. So it's how young people engaging technology and digital technology to be able to create a livelihood for themselves. And that is from using like formal platforms like Uber, Jumia, Sendy to actually get work, but also it's using Facebook and WhatsApp to actually make a livelihood. We have seen a lot of that happening. And why are we doing this? Why should we be doing this? I mean, Africa is 75% under the age of 35. That is huge. I always tell Patrick his work is fully cut out for him, because this is work to create employment. But there's a rise in unemployment and underemployment. This is where people are just working for a living. It's one salary out of the other. It's one small income after the other. And we're trying to solve what is that magical stick that is going to solve this for us. And not only do we have like an increasingly young population, technology on the other hand is also increasing and making our lives easier. Is there a connecting point for this? So what we are trying to do is support and have a sustainable work that grows, that helps our young people navigate both entrepreneurship, but also work. And it's a mindset. And when we were talking to these young people, it was very interesting because we had these debriefs with the team. And we're thinking every one of the young people, young women and men, not just, I have to to emphasize on that, every one of them saw themselves as an entrepreneur. When you talk to people, they say, now I'm an entrepreneur. And 2 days ago, we had a discussion on what is the difference between an entrepreneur and a self-employed person. Yeah. And it's all a matter of mindset. When you talk to these people, they have a vision. They say, I want, first of all, to be able to, as an Uber guy would say, be able to, first of all, feed myself. And then the next stage is be able to employ other people such that I am able to be an employer and be able to be sustainable, take my kids to school, but also take other kids to school. And that's the mentality we have been seeing. So for us, it is that being able to change the world very, very practically. And with the support of Caribou, we've been able to understand our young people much, much better. Who are we targeting? We are targeting everyone. Okay, but kidding. So we're targeting policymakers, and Ehud should be on the call today. Ehud and the team from the Ministry of ICT and also some people from the Ministry of Industrialization have been super supportive in helping us understand what is the need from a policy point of view. Is what does the government need to know about the digital economy and platform livelihoods? So we want this report to be able to inform some of those policy things. We are going to later in the month hold a learning event for government to be able to show them this is the findings that we have found and this is where you can learn. And Ehud has been like championing for us. I'm so excited about that through the Ajira platform. That Ajira is a platform. It's a platform for livelihoods, and he's been championing. We are very excited about that. Thank you so much, Ehud, for that. And the second part is platform builders. And I have to call out Bolt, Uber, Sandy. These are the people we have spoken to over and over again in trying to refine as experts to try and refine our thinking around platform livelihoods. And we're very excited about that they are actually listening and they're saying, well, how can we make our lives better? And Nasubo will talk about, especially in the next piece of work, where we are challenging platforms to do better in terms of equality. And finally, for researchers, we are just scratching the surface here. There's so much data. We found that we cannot just put in this 100+ report. Somebody sent me, you send us 100+ page report. Who is going to read that? I said, there are people who are reading it, but we have so much other insights and we are still looking for more insight and finding more insights. And we love researchers to be able to do this. And our goal is to be able to design for all. It's to be able to design for the 10, we did this study in more than 10 counties. It's not just a Nairobi thing. I need to be able to clarify that. We did this across 10 counties in Kenya. We spoke to young people across 10 counties in Kenya. And we realized that this is not just a Nairobi thing. It is something that is actually across the country. And we need to be able to design for somebody who is doing gig work from a smart kabambe, but to somebody who's just going through their SMSs and receiving WhatsApp messages to try and get work through a very fancy smartphone. We need to be able to design these platforms for all and be able to make a change in their livelihoods in a very tangible manner. And the one question I think we were asking ourselves at the very beginning, what does meaningful work mean to people? Is it satisfying? Is it about money? Is it about passion? Or is it what is fulfillment for them? Is it pursuing a passion? Or is it getting food on the table for their children? So those are the questions that the report will try to answer. So our goal is to see is platform livelihood a way of the future in reducing unemployment. Are we able to do it? So just to tell you, this is a first part of a long series of studies that both ourselves and Caribou are running, and you'll be seeing more of this. So thank you so much for being part of this. And I'll hand over, I'll show you a small video, then hand over to Mbugwa to talk to the panelists. And thank you so much, the panelists, for being part of this. Thank you. Nas, put it full screen. Oh, share voice. Just pause for a minute. Go to your settings and share sound.
I think mi usema marketing ndo ile kitu yuko ngumu sana. Audio recording si noma. Video si noma sana, of which ni noma. Marketing sasa kizungumkuti kiko pale.
As it is right now, the buying process is just a conversation. Someone DMs you on Instagram, they inquire about a product, you tell them that you'll deliver. The back and forth between you and the client takes a bit of time, which I think becomes a limit for growth.
WhatsApp is mostly for friends and family, people who already know me. So if someone wants like to purchase my artwork immediately, they'll probably see it in WhatsApp first before they see it on IG. Yeah. And Instagram is more professional.
That's about any elaborate.
Ukifanya through platform partner inakaa rahisi tu, order zinatoka huko kwa wingi.
So guys, this is the seedling for purple cabbage. A few months into farming, I discovered digital farming platforms. These are online platforms whereby farmers list their produce and they get customers. After discovering that, I posted my produce, which are tomatoes, spinach, onions, after which I received calls from different parts of.
You're on mute, Nas.
Sorry, Baraka?
I'm saying we'll share the video later. We can just pick it up from here and then let's share the video a bit later.
Oh, okay. I think we can invite Mbugua as we look at that, sort out the issue with the video.
Excellent. Good afternoon, good morning, depending on your time zone. I think it's fantastic to be here. My name is Mbugua Njehia. What I do day to day is I try to connect people to their daily opportunities in the mobility space. You can call me Mbugua Matatu, but it's a sector, the PSV sector is one of the ones that we're looking to transform. Patrick of Mastercard Foundation has just jibed me when I put a comment in there saying, there's the constitutional youth is between 18 to 35, but we all like to consider ourselves, young at heart. So maybe even looking at the report, we could even expand that context to include also those who are young at heart and looking at getting onto the platform economy. Today, I'm joined by an amazing panel. I'll just name them one by one, but then just go right into the meat of the report. So we have Nekesa Were, who's Director of Strategy at African Labs, Nanjira, who's a Tech Policy and Governance Analyst, Patricia Okello, founder of Kayana Collective, Maurice Otieno, Executive Director of Baraza Media Lab, Evelyn Ongare, Farmer on Fire, CEO, Gituku Ngene, Senior Advisor, Youth Employment and Innovation at the Masico, Patrick Karanja from Mastercard Foundation, Maureen and Emma. So I'd like to start with the practitioners, and Evelyn, you get to go first. One of the sectors that was looked at in this report was farming, and there seems to be a renaissance in that particular sector. And there's this tag that I've been seeing online saying, Ukulima sio ushamba, on the interwebs. And youth are seemingly trying to take up farming. What is the reality for you on the ground based on the work you're doing at Farmer on Fire and also as a small-scale farmer yourself?
Thank you for that, and thank you for having me. So Yes, the report is quite insightful in terms of things on the ground. And as you mentioned, ukulima sio ushamba, that's what we're trying to do. It's rebranding farming, because when we think of farming, we think of a different thing than what we're doing right now. And the only difference I can say is that our lives are more dignified because of the platforms that we are going to share today. So for me, I'm quite excited to be here, and even just to elaborate on young people who are trying out farming. Why I went into farming is because I had zero capital, and for other people, they are finding themselves in that situation where you have no work experience because of loss of jobs or unemployment rates, or you don't literally have an income. And so you're thinking, at least I can use my parents' land. For me, I had to borrow my neighbor's plots to start a farming venture. And I feel like this is giving us hope, because we are also not doing it in a shameful way. We are doing it with a way where we are showing the world that we are proud of what we're doing. And the world is also getting that vibe, that energy that, oh, okay, so this can be a thing. This can be an income generation activity.
Fantastic. One of the things I noticed about Farm on Fire is that you create a lot of content. So apart from being a farmer yourself, you also create a lot of content that helps other farmers. What's been your sort of journey through that, and have you been able to see progress over time? When did you start, and how has that grown over time?
Interesting story. So if you told me 3 years ago I'd be a farmer and I'd be blogging about it, I would have thought, oh my God, that is crazy talk. But then, born in Nyahururu, born and bred there, I was that fat kid who loved mandazi. And my mom every day used to make uji and mandazi for our workers. So I would tag along with my mandazi agenda. And my mom saw this and she would encourage me and bought me a small kajembe just to help me with that. But because I never saw money change hands, I never saw it as a career choice. So post that, came to Nairobi for campus, got into the corporate world and forgot. Then I'm retrenched, Barclays loan, you know how they top you up when you have a salary, but then now you're here with zero, you're even actually at negative. So it's that one of thinking, oh, how do I help myself? My mom had a kitchen garden, so at least I can start there. I saw her have a kitchen garden. And then from there now, your friends come and they're like, oh, Wangari, you're growing your own food. Even me, I want to start, but I don't know how. Me, I'm an urbanite. I never got to know this lingo. So I would make for them small shots and clips. This is how you plant. This is how much water you need. This is why your plants are dying, pest control. And then eventually that's how the YouTube channel was born. And then from there now it's going up the value chain. It's no longer about just production. It's taking on your space. And even people say it's just the courage. And as Shiko is saying about taking yourself as an entrepreneur, seeing yourself in the table and joining the conversation. And for me, it's just moving up the value chain of what else can I do other than production? Yes.
Fantastic. So did you have to upskill yourself in any way, like whether it's through a TVET or, how did you go about acquiring additional knowledge to help you then expand your circle of influence in matters farming?
So I have a master's degree from USIU in strategic management, but so that's aside. And then now I'm just self-taught. I'm just figuring it out as I go. I'm visiting a lot of farmers. And then I've joined the YouTube University. You know about YouTube University? Yeah. It kind of basically just Google. You just search things and then you find them. So you say, my rabbit is not eating, and it has that. The same way you Google when you have a newborn and you're like, oh, my baby has colic, what are the home remedies? It's the same way for me. So it's basically self-taught and just putting myself in those interactive spaces, like joining as many Facebook groups as I can, and just putting myself in that sector, and in terms of even going to see other farmers and learning from them as well. And currently I'm even offering that, where I'm encouraging agritourism, where I take farmers to other farmers to learn, exchange program kind of thing.
Fantastic. Yeah. I think one of the things I like about what you're saying is that you're not a one-trick pony. I mean, it's not a farmer, you're also creating content, and you're also now doing this thing for agricultural tourism, which shows that, you know, the agenda for most of the people in this sector, the youth that are being looked at, is to try and expand your sphere of influence. Remembering that you came from corporate where you're probably on blinders. This is your JD, this is what you do. But what I hear you saying is that you had to essentially expand or open up your opportunities as you see them develop. Thank you for that. Next, I'll call in Nekesa, Director of Strategy at AfriLabs. And for you, Nekesa, you have been at the front row of innovation happening across the continent, and you've probably seen your fair share of platforms come to the market. What are some of the biggest points of concern, given that the opportunity to connect marketplaces is kind of like obvious? You know, everyone's trying to throw their hat at the ring. What are your biggest points of concern?
I'll say it's just one point, actually, and especially having read this report, it's just the one that constantly is coming to mind. And it's the usability, and it's how connected the owners of these platforms are with the intended users. And then, you know, just like I also had to bear in mind that perhaps the audience of this report or the subjects, I'm not within that demographic because initially when I was looking at the platforms that I use, the e-commerce platforms that I use, and I'm saying these serve my purposes, because when I'm buying something, I want it to be seamless. I want it to be convenient. You know, the less human interaction, the better. So I want to go onto the site, pick what I want, pick my size, check out, pay, and then I don't even want the rider to call me. I want to get home after work and find, you know, the thing waiting for me, you know. But reading this report and then also considering the demographic, who these business people are, and then also who they're speaking to, it's becoming, it now feels like there's this huge social aspect that the current e-commerce platforms aren't meeting. It feels as though as much as these platforms offer convenience, business people and perhaps even those they serve are looking for more interaction. Right. And so in the video, for example, we saw, I think her name is Beverly, talking about, you know, it's all about talking to your customers on the chat and then figuring out what it is they want. And you see that influencing a lot how people are beginning to interact with business, how they're using WhatsApp, they're using Instagram. I think also saw the artist, she didn't mention any e-commerce platform. She spoke about WhatsApp being for the formal business. And then she spoke about Instagram being for the formal business, people who don't know how much using WhatsApp and so on. So there's this huge social movement. It feels as though the youth are moving towards building communities around their products and letting that sell the product. So it's not necessarily that they're looking for an e-commerce platform to sell the product, but they're looking for actual people to sell the product. And the way to get your market to sell your product is to interact with them and get to that point of empathy and constant interaction with them, where they become your own ambassadors. So my big question, having looked at that report, is how relevant do the mainstream e-commerce platforms continue to be? Do they serve their demographic, and should they be satisfied with that? Or should they begin to look at the social e-commerce and see what elements of that they want to begin to incorporate into e-commerce?
Fantastic. I think to summarize, it would be maybe that we need to tropicalize the solutions. And I think having also engaged quite a number of these platforms that are coming from outside the continent or outside the country, is that for many of the development teams, you know, are based outside of the continent or outside of the country. So some of these nuances that you speak into are, you know, probably a feature set that may be thought of later. But for me, that presents an opportunity. And like Dr. Shiko said, you know, this report is relevant for also policymakers and also entrepreneurs, because you are then able to see, you know, the opportunities and the gaps, you know, that exist. A funny nuance is maybe that need for interaction is what has us all say, you know, DM for pricing, which, you know, I think many people hate. But, you know, like you rightfully said, we're still looking for that human connection. You want to order your chicken tikka? Yes, you can go to a platform and say, I want it, you know, this is the one I want at this price point, add a soda, etc. But then you want to tell them just how you want your chili. So if we just try to automate things, I think you make a very valid point in terms of some of the bigger platforms, international ones, are missing out on those really small nuances that might drive stickability. So allow me to jump and speak to Maurice, Executive Director at Baraza Media Lab. And Maurice, your work at the lab has a special focus on the creative sector. And the creative sector was one that was hit quite hard by the pandemic. So as you read the report, what resonated with you, and how does that align with your ambitions at the lab?
Thank you, Mbugo, for the question, and thank you all for having me today. When I saw the report from and the invite from the Qhala team, it was so timely because we are going through this process of where we as a lab are also trying to figure out what is our relevance within the market, the creative and the media space. And what I learned, or what I saw on the platform, was basically somewhat what Nekesa is talking about in terms of the digital platforms being a bit rigid for the creators, and the creators looking for another platform for them to showcase their art. And that's why you see social media has that freedom, right? So if I find most creatives, most media personalities are finding social media allowing them to be free, allowing them to have ownership of their audience in terms of data, in terms of customer feedback, and that empowers them. It has democratized those silos that these platforms were creating for creators, and even distribution of information. And it is a good thing. It's a good thing for the media and creative space because, again, everybody now has equal access, and it's only up to you as a creator to be able to know how smart to develop your audience. Because, again, one of the things that I also learned from the report was now creators or creatives have become almost experts in the entire value chain, right? I'm creating content, which is the main thing, but I need to know how to do search engine optimization. I need to know how to price my product. I need to know how to negotiate a contract. I need, so things that initially was being negotiated in the back end for you as a creator, now you have to interface and interact with it. And in that, it brings an opportunity for people like us in the lab to look at, with all these new skill set that is required of the creative industry, what gap can we fill? We don't want to make you an IP lawyer today, but we want you to have that basic knowledge of just glancing on it and looking at it and saying, okay, it's okay. And that also demystifies this common notion that you hear everybody talk about creatives, or creatives don't want accounting, creatives don't want sales. I mean, it's not their job. You don't go to your doctor and ask them, if you're not an accountant, then you cannot treat me, right? So why ask creatives of the same thing? I think for me, it's just a matter of giving them the basic knowledge that they require on all these things to meet the current needs of the value chain. And then that's it. And let lawyers and accountants and salespeople be what they are. So that's one thing that I've learned on the platform and what is shaping how we are looking at Baraza. The other thing is that the existing structures of distribution of either information or creative products has changed, right? Mm-hmm. And it also presents us with new challenges. So issues around IP, issues around pay, right? You see every 3 months, you see hashtag pay creatives trending, right? So for us, it's more about, yes, these are the new challenges that are coming up because we've democratized how to find jobs, but we also need to look at how do we enable the job seekers or the gig seekers to sufficiently hold their own in a conversation. Or also how do we protect them from a tech platform perspective, because issues of privacy also arises when you and cyberbullying, right? And as you said, Google, which is very true, most of the creative people, these are the people that we run to when we are sad. These are the people we run to when we are happy. But when the entire world was sad, they were even more sad because they feed off on our energy and we had no energy, right? So right now, issues like mental health becoming mainstream in terms of creatives, looking at that as a piece of like, how do we also tackle that as a component? So, and I want to finalize on this. As I was looking at the platforms, and I like how Dr. Shiko started off of, in terms of the platforms are meeting the need of making the supply chain or the value chain become optimized and efficient and all. And Nekesa added another point that I'll link up later on in terms of the platforms need to go beyond just giving me opportunities, right? So if it's livelihood, how do I know that I'm safe health-wise and I can drive my Uber? Is there an opportunity for the platforms to offer more than just the work and opportunities and marketing in terms of issues like, I don't know, health insurance, mental health training, financial management training, things that look at you holistically as a person and not just a wheel in the cog of the entire value chain of creativity. I'll pause that because I might end up giving a whole sermon. So thanks.
Excellent. You spoke about, when the world was sad, the creatives got sadder. But I remember there was a $1 million stimulus plan by the Ministry of Sports. Did your members, get any whiff of that? Could that have been managed better, differently? What happened? What happened there?
Good question, and I'm happy that this report informs policymakers. But again, media and creatives and policymakers to some extent are almost like kerosene and water, because it's almost like, oh, so you're making money from Facebook, then let's tax Facebook, So I'm open to work with policymakers to find a middle ground, but I'm also very wary of how they operate, because for them anything is a bit transactional, right? To be honest, I've not had anyone who benefited from their million shillings in my network. But I'm also very excited to just see that the custodians who are given the opportunity to collect things like copyright for musicians recently are being whipped for not doing their job, right, with Kekobo. And I'm also, parting shot, I'm also very happy that in this research, as I was reading it, and I kudos to the Qhala team and Mastercard and Caribou, it's not just your typical research that I've seen a lot of blue chip research companies do and just focus on, if it's creative, if it's music, you look at Sauti Sol. If it's cartoonist, you look at Gado. So people who are mainstream. I like the fact that you went a little bit out of your way, because as much as, yes, there's the platforms that are enabling people to distribute their content and receive money, there's a whole new industry that is offline, your river roads, and that's where money is moving in that space. So I like the fact that you brought it closer to that offline bit. So really excited.
I'm happy that you touched on the on the river road side, because in a former life I was actually in the business of selling music and ringtones, and I remember there was a place out on River Road called Ndutu One Stop Shop.
Ndutu One Stop Shop. Yeah.
And the distribution engine there was epic, And these artists, these videographers, guys were making proper bank. It's just that it was invisible, With the coming of all these new platforms, then we get to see a lot of everyone's trying to be a mediator, but then also disrupting the flow of value there. What I'm happy to see is that some bigger players, like Safaricom, actually coming in and saying, "Listen, dear creators, we want to work closer with you," and essentially putting out content that trains or at least gives people upskills them on the knowledge, like you said. How do you deal with matters IP? I don't go and grab Morris's music and use it on my film. This is how you can negotiate for revenue share. And even on some of the platforms that they're putting out that are more topicalized, looking at, can we now have fairer sort of revenue shares for artists? Maybe one of the extensions now, especially for digital artists, people like who are drawing and things like that. We've got NFTs now. And who knows, we might actually get maybe our first Kenyan multi-millionaire from an NFT sale, and that will really shake the market. So thank you for those insights. Gituku now.
Thank you for having me.
Senior advisor, youth employment and innovation at the Mercy Corps. You have done a lot of work globally on the issue of youth employment, and statistics point to the fact that youth unemployment or underemployment remains a big challenge for Kenya and other countries. How has the platform livelihoods and the platform ecosystem evolved for the Kenyan youth, and how has that economy changed this state for the young people?
Okay. Thank you so much, Mbogwa. Yeah, so essentially, youth employment continues to be a challenge for, majority of countries, Kenya included. And we are still a long way from, actually achieving, actually addressing this. So there's still a lot of work to be done. But even as we work around this, we are observing certain trends that characterize, the engagement of young people within the labor force. And what's actually interesting is if you look at Kenya, and I think Africa in general, the traditional approach, the binary approach of employed versus unemployed, to a certain extent, does not apply in Kenya and most African labor markets, right? So for most young people, what you'll see is, a combination of portfolios of work. So I'll give an example of about a guy I used not too long ago. And what he does is in the morning, he'll, he has a chapati kibanda. He will go make chapatis in industrial area, finish that by around 9, 10, goes to a border place, works on border for, pretty much his whole day. And then in the evening, he has a small kiosk where he sells, like cabbage and groceries and whatnot. And that's what's characterized, like most young people in Kenya, right? That kind of mixed portfolio. And as we move along, we sort of see this now, the digital economy sort of coming to complement this or sort of playing a more central role by enhancing that versatility amongst the transition of young people within all these hustles, the labor force and whatnot. So essentially, if I have wage labor in the morning, then, if we take the example of this border guy, on one hand, he'll sell chapati, but then he knows that, if he's a Sandy delivery guy, he knows the platform kicks in at around 10. So it's pointless for me to be on the platform until 10, right? Gets onto the platform, does some hustle, does deliveries across town, and then he knows there's downtime or there's traffic from 4 p.m. So transitions to something else, etc. So we are seeing, the question of unemployment really taking a different, twist or a different turn. And I think this has happened offline for the longest time, but now, and this I think is something that was captured in this report, the fact that we can no longer box, young people within the labor force in one profile. Like we can say, so-and-so is unemployed or is employed. There's a broader sense to the issue of employment versus unemployment when you think about these young people engaging in the labor force. The other perspective to this that's super interesting, and I was glad when Maurice talked about River Road, and I think he also talked about it, is the issue around informality. Now, the reality within Kenya and most African markets is more than 80% of our labor force is informal. So these are the Juakali guys, the carpenters, the border riders, the people on River Road, etc. And that informality really brings in a very interesting dynamic when you think about the digital economy, especially when you compare it to what the digital economy is in the Western markets, in Europe, in the US, in Asia, etc. Because here, what the digital economy is doing is it's sort of propping up this informal sector and bringing in a certain level of professionalism, versatility, opening up more opportunities, and providing a level of infrastructure that was previously absent. So now, a furniture maker on Ngong Road, who initially used to rely on, customers coming over to his spot, can now have a platform on, whether it's Sky Garden or, or Link or, another platform. And as a result, access new markets, whether in Nyali, Mombasa, or in Homa Bay, or, on the other side of Thika Road, etc. So that infrastructure, that versatility, that opening up of new opportunities is what's now, characterizing the employment landscape. And we're really seeing, young people redefining how they engage within the labor force in a very different way than what we were seeing, about 5, 10, maybe 15 years ago.
I have an interesting thought here. So like you said, Mbogwa in the morning, Chapati Kibanda does his deliveries at construction sites, 10 a.m. He's there doing boda, taking people that last mile to work. How would my resume look like? You're working across the globe with all this youth. How would you suggest that my resume looks like in the odd chance that maybe I want to transition from this informal space to maybe something more formal? Do I then, one of the tools that probably most of us are on is LinkedIn, and there are certain sets of years, I was at this place, How does that look? And how are employers also looking at someone who walks in with such I call it a complex pedigree of experience, across?
Yeah. And that's a good question, because I think for us in the white collar industry, we have tools that have been established to sort of build that work portfolio, right? You can track, Gituku or Mbogua, used to work at X company. He did this for 5 years, amassed this type of skills, etc. But then, when you look at this 80-90% of the informal sector, there's almost, zero traceability of what they're able to do, the skills that they have, the kind of engagements that they have done. And one of the things that digital platforms are doing, and, this came out in the report, is professionalizing these hustles. And it actually goes beyond just, because if you look at it from, like an employer-employee perspective, within the digital economy, that definition might not really sit. So, a boda guy, if Gituku needs a boda, I'll most likely not, flip and see, oh, this guy has, done rides to Homa Bay, so I feel more confident, riding with him. But there's a broader value to that traceability and, that tracking of the experience. Because when you start thinking about, like support services, like financial services, this group has largely been locked out due to the absence of this kind of records, right? So if let's take Mbogwa, who's the boda guy, let's say he needs a loan to now buy a second bike because he sees this space is thriving. Initially, he had zero way to prove that he could service that loan. Now, when he's on a platform like Sandy or SafeBorder or any of the other platforms, he can confidently go to the bank, or the bank can come to him and say, we can actually see that you're making about 500 bob a day. So we feel confident in giving you a loan where you can, repay 250 shillings. So that visibility that's coming out is, provides so much value for this, for this informal sector and for gig workers in general. And is something that's, that is a trend that we are seeing, that's super unique to this part of the world, given the invisibility that this kind of workers had in.
Fantastic. I think you mentioned a key point there where, a lot of that revenue or a lot of the income that most of those involved in the platform economy are getting is actually lost. There was a video there and I saw, there was one of those boda guys who said, I get 15 rides a day. I've made 2,000 something today. And that's just on the ride side of things. And like if you said, if I then have something else on a different platform, those numbers start to look very, very interesting and actually compete quite favorably with what you'd get probably from a regular office job. Now, I'll go over to Nigeria, tech policy and governance analyst. So this report has a youth focus, and we know that millennials and Gen Z, are predisposed to this independence thing, which is what makes them most likely to latch onto the platform economy. But there's a dark side to this liberation. So let's have a conversation around the legal and social protections as it relates to platforms, both for workers, for people who are providing services, and also for the consumers. What are your thoughts on that?
Thanks, Bukwa. It's a pleasure to join everybody here. Well, for one, there's as you're calling it, the dark side, where for most folks, we're caught up in it's better than nothing thinking, where there aren't any social protections. We hear our parents talk about what kinds of labor protections they used to have, or you hear Tweli talk about workers. And a lot of that does not translate to what this new path that we're all walking looks like. And I think Uber is the most visible and visceral example in our market for a lot of folks, but it really is translating across many of the other platforms, and especially those that are not homegrown, right? Initially, remember, everybody jumped into Uber because it was supposed to be the premise of working on your own terms, additional income kind of thing, until people start to realize as the game was being changed, it's all becoming a mirage. Unfortunately, then too many of us are not only getting access to these platforms, which is fine, but we're getting into a work world where that is the new normal, which is not normal. So, you're your own insurance, you're your own protection, you're your own everything. And it really shows how governments, in as much as we're seeing these kinds of reports, are supposed to help policymakers, have snoozed on the job. And this is not something they started yesterday. We're looking at decades in the making of bad policy that only favors those who are big companies or big players, or that kind of favor. The rest of us are being left on our own. And, as they say in Swahili, mnyonge ana haki, but our resilience keeps us finding ways to survive. And so within that, it becomes tricky, as you're asking about the autonomy of the platform economy, to figure out how to sustainably push for legislation or policies or reforms in regulatory spaces that will actually protect us, right? Uber Drivers Association in Kenya, for example, tried to take a case to court where they could actually make sure that they're registered or classified as workers, because then we have pretty strong labor protections in the formal sector, but would formalize what we are calling this informal sector. Here it's not taken, but there's precedent in California now and in the UK. And I hope that they do keep pushing, because for one, yes, it is a platform technically that works pretty well. Yes, there's competition from others, but a lot of us, either the first mover advantage or PR has made it the Uber of everything. You know how Aquafresh or whatever, Colgate was the toothpaste. So Uber is exactly that kind of thing that happens in a peculiar Kenyan way. It still has its merit as a platform that it's created, but we do not have any control to legislate how it's operated or how its data is used locally. And we see that with Facebook, we see that with WhatsApp, we see that with many of the platforms that are we have sort of using and that we're leveraging around this. Now, at the same time, we're not saying that our policymakers should just run around trying to then get to regulate or govern for the sake of. A lot of what they end up doing when they try to put measures, as Maurice was rightfully pointing out, we are the ones who bear the cost. If they say they want to tax Facebook because they've seen a bunch of us are using Facebook or Uber or anything else, the cost will be passed down to us. So it works both ways, where neither the gig worker or the one who's supposed to be the consumer is getting the better end of the deal. But because we have been pushed to a point of desperation, it almost seems like these are just nice, high to have ivory tower conversations. But it's a continuous loop towards the bottom. And this Kenya of ours, where we're always surviving, it does ask a question of how much longer we can live in a precarious environment. And it's something we should charge. I mean, in an ideal Kenya, with a young vote going to be the most determining vote in this upcoming election, even if it's not about the presidential, but making sure your MCA or your MP, that person is supposed to represent you as close as possible to your area of being, is the one you put the pressure on. That could really start to create the atollies of a platform economy, but more importantly, laws and non-taxation regimes that give us a fighting chance.
Excellent. You spoke mostly to the platform workers themselves. But what about the consumers? I mean, you've seen online quite a lot of issues with people on the consumer side, and it almost feels like it's really difficult to get any form of corrective justice or realignment done. How do we then address that part? Yes, it's great that lots of youth in the thousands are getting jobs, but again, because of the lack of control of quality or quality assurance, we're seeing a lot of customers or end users bear the brunt of say rogue operators. How do we handle that?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think the social commerce aspect that was being discussed earlier is pretty interesting, because I feel like that's in itself become a check and measure. The moment I try and buy something from Nasubo and what she advertised versus what I end up getting as a consumer is a bonoko, we see the social element coming in. Either people will be like, do not buy from Nasubo, or sort of blacklisting as a social mechanism. It's in itself, I mean, I guess there aren't studies yet as to whether that's an effective measure, because I don't think it's necessarily helpful to ask the government to go in there and do anything. As we've seen our government, to give them an inch, they'll take the entire country. So you really don't want to be using those kinds of mechanisms. So I think the social element that we have going on here is really interesting. It does become tricky when it's the social aspect of the commerce, even from the consumer side, but to a platform that is not necessarily domiciled here. And I'd use Bolt as another example right now, and especially women's experiences with Bolt. The way the Bolt folks who are representatives here respond is basically just that what they've been authorized to do. The real decision makers are not here. They're in Estonia, for example. At that level is where we would love to see that, we'd have our governments or our policies escalate and step in to request, Bolt officials either respond to our parliament or to another mechanism as to why these are the things that are happening, because the harms are documented. We'd have to be very careful about the kind of recommendations we ask for intervention by whom and where on that end. But for now, the consumer's best bet is to keep talking, and ideally consumer associations would come up and over time either rank guys or companies and that kind of thing based on complaints, resolution of complaints and that all so on and so forth. So there's a lot of reform we do need across what we have as a policy or regulatory landscape, not the way government has made it all look like just kiboko, but really that shows that we're adapting to the times. And that's not necessarily going to be done by the folks who are in those places. So maybe at Wali of the platform economies in this audience, and they're inspired to take up action.
Fantastic. It's again, in the last few months, I made it my ambition to actually speak to as many platform workers as I could. Every time I take a boda or one of the ride-hailing services, I ask these guys, who speaks for you? And it was interesting that a lot of the feedback I got is like, this guy on TV, I don't know who he is. He's never called us for a meeting. So that all these factions that are happening all over the place, and it will be interesting to see how that consolidates over time. Another discussion we could have, and maybe pack it for also the rest of the group, is there was this story about academic writing and how Kenyans are the ninjas, are the brains of the world, helping guys get their PhDs and whatnot. And there's an interesting discussion to be had there around policy, governance, and willing buyer, willing seller, and also predatory platforms, in the sense that most of these platforms take upwards of 50% of the work done. But I think we can park that for the open session later. Patricia, founder of Kayana Creative, you head out this amazing community of female entrepreneurs. Do you feel that the voice of women was captured in this report? And what is your experience from your cohort members who fit into the youth bracket or the young at heart?
Thank you so much, Mbogwa. It's just been an absolute pleasure to just listen to everybody who's come on before us. The wealth of knowledge and experience is just something else. I hope the audiences are enjoying it. So yes, I was sent this 104-page report to read, and I wondered will I really have the energy or the time to go through this report? But I have to tell you, it was an absolute joy for me to read it, and I'm really, really happy that Dr. Shikwa and her team invited me to this panel, and also just shared the report in enough time for me to read it a couple of pages a day. So yes, I did feel that women were well represented. The areas that are covered in the report are around the creative economy, logistics, farming, entrepreneurship, and all sectors had somebody speak, a woman specifically speaking. I want to talk about Natasha specifically, who I remember when she was interviewed and asked, how did you get into this field? She said, man, I've always loved to ride, and being able to make money while I'm riding is really awesome. And even as she spoke, I could see my cultural bias already coming in, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, why is she there? This tough world out there. But honestly speaking, when you listen to Natasha speaking, you do feel that she's really passionate about her job, and certainly has the capacity to do the work she does. Explaining as well, one of the things that is extremely important, I feel, in women, and is becoming even more important to youth and in this gig economy, is being able to choose when you're working. I think that came up quite clearly, because for women, we do need to be able to select. While we're talking about young women, maybe at that time they may be single, as is natural, a majority of them may end up going into families and may still want to continue working, but want the freedom that I think platforms will be able to give them in order when to put on your app, when to put it off, and even in the sense of just managing, taking your whatever gig you're doing and taking it seriously. I think that was covered pretty well. Of course, we have the traditional sectors where women always feature, which is around food and fashion. And I loved the clip of Beverly that was just shared earlier. And if you watch the whole clip, you actually see her in her place of work, and then you see her jumping onto another platform, a logistics platform, where she's working with her rider to do, the last mile deliveries. So I can imagine in something like this, especially if you look at a food chain, like where the farmers are, you could see a complete chain where you could have only women actually from start to finish of the food chain, which I thought was excellent. Speaking to the farmer on fire and the onion farmers, and just listening to how they've been able to work. I don't know how effective it could have been without the platforms. And of course, we'll talk later about the gender bias and the cultural biases of working with women. But I do feel that in terms of this livelihood report, it features women and it shows women at work pretty well. And you can immediately see what Platform Livelihoods have done in terms of the women being able to do their work. Certainly within my community and the community of Kayana and the wider Circles for Women in Business community, we do see many women and many youth. Actually, in fact, I would say the demographics, especially for Circles for Women in Business, is around the 25, 28 mark. That's where the majority of the younger people are. In Kayana, we do see youth, we do have youth members, but because our focus is on businesses that are in ideation to startup, we have a mix of much more mature women in the platform, people who've been in formal employment for years and have quite high level of experience, but may need support when it comes to starting a business, because this is a different, part of their brain that they'll be using. So they do need a supportive environment to be there. And I think the mix of having the youth who are go-getters and seeing, and feel like they're first of all, very familiar with using platforms, and then feel like, the world is their oyster and they can trade beyond borders, is a really fantastic mix for the women within our networks in terms of Kayana. Another thing that we see with the young women is using other technologies. So there is the social platforms, of course, and there is where they do their trading and they show their wares. There is the networking angle. We use a lot of video. So many women who are actually very shy of going in front of the camera, but are quite happy to speak about their businesses. We've been able to film them and feature and show them on YouTube channels, and then they're able to distribute them amongst their networks, etc. So there is that embracing, but we've also seen technologies that are not platforms, that are not very common, which is around podcasting, and seen a lot of young people who want to come into the space specifically to share a podcast, in an area that they feel that is very interesting. A lot of areas around mental health, which is a big deal, of course, with the use of social media, and everybody, especially the young ladies in the network, wanting to lend their voice within that sector because it's something that they feel that they have experienced. So we see a lot of that. We do see multiple platforms being used. So while WhatsApp tends to be the main platform to share and distribute products, we also see people on Instagram looking at things like growing their own personal brands in order to show that they're experts in a multiple plethora of areas. So yeah, we're seeing, this is it. For women, I feel that platforms is the way to go. Don't overthink it. You're able to quickly share and get feedback quickly from the market. And I think it's something that women enjoy, and we will see a lot more of that happening.
Great. I think you surfaced a really important point, which is, that the daily clock or the daily schedule between, male and female platform operatives is vastly different. So one of the benefits of being able to get onto a platform is that you can actually determine, what time you can come on and not lose on any opportunity or not be penalized, for anything. And I like that you also brought out some of the additional opportunities that exist, and connecting this with the work that Morris is doing at the Baraza Lab, like things like audio. I believe those have such a wide, have a much simpler, sort of get-up that's required, and have what we call the long tail of content. Because if you just look at traditional radio, where now you have radio stations that have made quite a bit of money because they were able to then tap into audio and go down deep into maybe vernacular languages and be able to communicate with people in a way that connects better to them. I think that opens up a lot more opportunities. That's true. I'll go now to Maureen. As a gig economist, my question to you is, do the overall economics of these platforms make sense? are they sustainable outside a lot of the heavy VC social operation capital that they attract? I mean, it's fantastic and the visions are great, but do the numbers make sense, or are we just pumping? Is it a feel-good opportunity at this point in time? Maureen?
Thanks, Mbogwa. I think it's good that you started the question by asking about the numbers, because what I did is, before I came on this call, I just did a quick Google search to actually check the number of small MSMEs that are registered in Kenya. And according to Google, it actually said that 1.56 million are licensed, and the unlicensed ones are like 5.85 million. So I think in perspective, the 5.85 million could actually be presenting an opportunity right there. So in terms of just maybe niching, if you want to niche out a product, if you want to niche out a service, because I think Shiko started by saying it's delivery of product or service in this particular ecosystem. So I think in terms of numbers, that makes a lot of sense. And so I've been, as a gig worker, I had to upskill, I had to reskill, I had to drop some skill set, and most important, I had to shift my mindset. And I'll give you an example. When I exited formal employment 8 years ago, of course, I had a big vision of starting my own business, which I did in the sanitation space, and so many things happened. And then I have to constantly fundraise for this startup, which is quite demanding as well, because it's a high capital business. And then I sat back, and like any other entrepreneur, at that time, I was halfway sending CVs in other places, halfway fundraising for and the day I stopped and I said, how can I repackage myself so that I can be able to earn an income? And then of course, continue to work on my startup. Then I went back to my skill set. I'm a marketer by profession, and this is what I had. And then I started really selling my services and my professional expertise to the gig economy. So in terms of sustainability, yes, I started small, but I'm not where I was 8 years ago. And then interestingly enough, I also got an opportunity to learn a new skill. And one of the things I've also been doing for the last 3 years is I work as a gig, a contract worker for a storytelling organization in the US. And at least they give me consistent gigs throughout the year. So I'm also a storyteller instructor. So you can see there's been a dynamic space for me to learn, to unlearn, and also continue to supply. And then of course, over the last 2 years, I've been structuring a platform that I've been running on Facebook, just using the available tools in terms of the technology and the internet. For a long time, was running a community page called Nyayo Mounds, but 2 years ago, I sat and I looked at it and I said, how can women be able to transact amongst ourselves? And again, coming from a very huge community in Nyayo Estate, there's around 4,000 houses here, and women able to sell, make from their kitchens and sell. Yes, they're doing it in terms of numbers. Is it sustainable? Yes. I have stories of women who actually now do this 100%. They bake cakes. They're supplying their services. They're supplying water. They're actually earning a decent economic income from their comfort of their homes, and of course, using the opportunities of digital. We don't have an app as Nyayo Moms. We used what was available, WhatsApp, conversational commerce. It's the next frontier. And of course, there's a lot of opportunities. As long as you shift your mindset, you look at the opportunity that is existing, and I've given just the data, and also the internet is driving this. And yes, the economy is shifting, the labor force is shifting. So I've been able to really still use my professional expertise to supply. Most of my clients come to me. I'm either designing sales strategies, I'm designing marketing strategies. Sometimes I even train. During COVID, early this year, I realized a lot of small businesses were struggling with sales, and sales is my strength. I quickly packaged a sales masterclass for 3 days. I put a flyer together. I sent it out to different WhatsApp groups that I'm on, and guess what? I got people who signed up, and it's been a consistent strive to, where are the opportunities, how are you positioning yourself? So in terms of sustainabilities, yes, there are, the numbers make sense.
Fantastic. I think it's great that you point out to the knowledge economy, because many times when people think about getting into this space, even as youth, you're thinking, I need to do something. But the understanding is more towards, are you able to extract some value or compensation for your time and for your, what I call creative capital? One more question for you is, we talk about decent incomes. What's decent? Who determines what is decent? Is an extra 20K a month decent? Or maybe if it's not extra, if what you're making per month is 20,000 shillings, is that decent? Whose benchmark do we use for that term of decent income?
I think there's the global definition of what decent is. And then, of course, there's a local context where we know what the minimum wage is. But I think it's up to you as an individual to define decent. Like for me, what I define decent is, can I put food on my table 3 times a day for my family? Yes. Can I afford to pay my rent, which is around 35,000 shillings a month? Yes. Can I afford to take my child to the school that I feel will give good quality? Yes. So for me, that's my parameter of definition. And I think it's a spectrum. And I think that's another thing. I think it's also important for gig workers to redefine that, because if I compare a decent income to where I was when I was employed, then I will be very discouraged, because by the time I was leaving the formal employment, I was already earning the, above 200,000 Kenya shillings, to put it in context. So there are days in a month I might make that amount of money. There are days that I might make that amount of money and it needs to push me for a few days. And then, of course, there's which is something that I'm also learning. It's something that I'm also learning. There are months I'll go dry, and there are months which will be good. So it's really a balance, and the definition is really very, very personal. It's up to you. So set your standards, set your definition of what you feel is decent, but also even like when I'm engaging, or maybe when I'm subcontracting, because of course, I've also built an entire ecosystem around it. I subcontract maybe digital design. I subcontract other things that go in creating value. I also try as much as possible to give what I feel is a decent wage. And even for my domestic house manager, let me just give that practical example. For my domestic house manager, I compensate based on what I feel is comfortable for her to be able to send her children to school, for them to access basic NHIF cover and things like that. So I think the definition is very, very personal, but there's also the global definition. And then, of course, there's also the Kenyan context. And at times I feel very discouraged. For example, at times I usually take, and this is a conversation I was having with my friends last week, I'll jump into an Uber, from point A to point B. And I know that this person for sure won't make any amount of shilling from this ride. What do I do? As a person, I always tip them. So I think those are some of the conversations. I'll give an example. So there's a day I took an Uber from here, I think, all the way to Karen. And it came to around 500 shillings. I mean, is that decent? According to me as an individual, no. But somebody will look at it like, hey, this is a good deal. So I think those are some of the things you need to start interrogating and introspecting. So even when I'm negotiating for a contract, I always have the people in my ecosystem who will help me deliver value to the client. And in fact, again, it also brings the conversation of niching. Of course, when I started, it was a bit, and payment, I think Maurice was talking about that. That's also very, very, and this is knowledge. So there's also issues around delivering the job and not getting paid. So I'm also putting systems and structures around it, but I still have to pay the people, my gig workers, I have to pay them. And your client hasn't paid. So there's all that. So what I've done over time is just to try and put a system around it and then niching out so that you're not having a discussion of invoice. Where the client places value, I've been able to start niching out to customers or consumers who actually place value to my knowledge.
Thanks a lot. I'm happy you actually alluded to another question I was going to ask in closing before I bring Patrick in, which was, how do we determine the pricing? When you start, most of these platforms highly subsidize one part of the ecosystem. But like you said, if we are to think more equitably and more open about how do we both extract and give value, I think the next place we need to examine these platforms from is that point of that point of equity. So thanks a lot for those experiences. Patrick, I think you'll close this session out for us before we Nasubo walks us through the gender lens, and then we open up for questions. For you, Patrick, what's the end game here? How does this all connect with the work that is happening at the Mastercard Foundation?
After listening to all these rich insights and discussions, which should be captured in a second version of the report shared, I think the bigger question is, so as you ask, so what? So what? We now know, but so what? This is an emerging phenomenon, if I put it that way. And thank you, Maureen, for that really, really great example of being a gig worker, but also being mindful about what it means to be a gig worker, something that we may be overlooking for some of us. And that's the essence of this work, Mbogwa. The essence of this work is, as I said, first is to understand, what does it mean? How is it? We can see the phenomena, but do we understand where the opportunities and the challenges or the barriers are for that phenomenon? So I'll bring into the perspective the work under which we now have this partnership, which is Young Africa Works. Mastercard Foundation launched the Young Africa Works strategy in 2018. And the idea behind Young Africa Works is to enable young people to secure dignified work. In particular, we're looking at 30 million, the goal is 30 million young people by the year 2030. Africa is growing in its demographic aspects of young people. We are looking at more young people being unemployed, or rather not having opportunities if we don't intervene. And this strategy allows us to partner and to work with stakeholders in Africa to not only understand, but also to intervene, to support, to collaboratively try and address the challenges and increase the opportunities. So this research contributes to that larger goal. In Kenya, and the research is specifically in Kenya, we already have some work going on. We launched in 2019. We do have some work going on in agriculture. We have some work going on in TVET, and we are looking at TVET and how do you get young people getting relevant skills. And so digital economy in that respect and platforms, for example, are quite relevant to the TVET space. When a young person leaves a TVET and maybe they've done plumbing or they've done some artisanal skill, how do they market themselves? How do they get more access to opportunities? They will eventually have to look at platforms. And so those are some of the things and insights that may be relevant and useful to us immediately. But we are also looking at going forward, how does information and these kind of trends shape and inform how we respond in terms of our strategies? In particular, as Shiko comes to the next phase about gender, we're not just in Kenya, we also have running programs and partnerships and presence in Rwanda, Uganda, and Ethiopia on the eastern part of Africa. And in the western part, we have Nigeria, Ghana, and Senegal. So Mbogo and team, this informs and continues to inform our thinking and our responses. Even though we have existing work, I think we will be picking some of the insights to see how best to respond under Young Africa Work strategy. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you for those insights, Patrick. I think, Nasubo, I'll hand it over to you for the gender lens bit, and then we'll come back, get some opinions from the panelists, and then open up for question and answer. Nasubo?
Excellent. I think this is the importance of research, because it keeps on giving you questions. It keeps on giving you questions to further probe, and you get insights, and you continue probing and probing. And so this is what necessitated this next thing that I'm going to share, where we wanted to now understand what, when it comes to gender, when it comes to women and using platforms, how is it? So remember in the previous project, what we did, we were careful at least to interview 50% of women in all the sectors, with the exception of logistics, where women are a bit underrepresented. And this work is good because we are still fostering the partnership with Caribou Digital and the Mastercard Foundation. And then we understand that despite the calls for gender equity and also trying to narrow the gender gap worldwide, there's still much to learn. There's still much to learn about how platforms impact women's life, especially now that we are still in the COVID-19 pandemic, trying to understand like beyond earnings, beyond access, beyond flexibility. Those are the things that we know mostly when it comes to gender. So beyond that, what else are women facing? What else are women going through? How can we ensure that women are not left behind, even as campaigns are out there to bring more women into the platform livelihoods and to try and empower more women to even start earning eventually. So we did this follow-up study where we were trying to just trying to see within this new area of platform livelihoods, what other issues are there? How can we dig deep into these issues, considering that women have a lot more things they need to juggle, for example, caregiving roles, there are other complexities that come up. So that's what we wanted to do with this research. So our big question here was, in what ways do platforms empower or disempower young women? And trying to just get the first experience, first women experiences of how they engage with digital platforms and what demographics they are part of. Are they part of the rural areas? Are they part of the urban areas? What is their education level? What is their marital status? Are they persons living with disabilities? So that is what we did for this study. So we employed many methodologies where we did obviously like key informant interviews with like experts, and then we had also interviews with women who are platform workers, and then we employed a new methodology where we were working with different WhatsApp groups, including Nyayo Moms that Maureen mentioned before, where we had like conversations, weekly conversations with these ladies, talking about their experiences as they use digital platforms. The other thing we did is have like focus group discussions with both male and female platform workers. Firstly, we had conversations with female workers in one focus group, and then we had a mixed focus group discussion where we try to understand what are the barriers, what are the enablers for women, even as they do work, or even as they try to find work or even earn as enabled by digital platforms. And the other thing that we are still working on is the participatory video stories, where we'll highlight the stories of 3 women in 3 different sectors and just get the experiences even as they work online. Remember, this work, we did it in Kenya. Still, the location is Kenya. We were trying to look at the urban population because we know that in Kenya, the population is only 20% of the citizens are in urban and peri-urban areas. So what issues are women in the rural areas also facing? So the sectors that we were looking at were obviously micro and small enterprises. We were also looking at freelancers. We first tried to see which sectors are women most prevalent in and highlighted that. So we realized it was, and I know Maureen gave a bit of statistics on this. For micro and small enterprises, some of them are licensed, some of them are not. We also looked at freelancers. I know someone mentioned like the academic writers. That's a huge story, especially in our context. We also looked at people who lease their assets online, for example, on Airbnb. And then we looked at a sector that is not female dominated, just to do like that comparison. We're looking at people who are motorcycle drivers. So remember, the essence of this is to try and understand, how do people find work online? How do they trade, that is buying and selling? And then how do they rent? That is listing assets. And then the last thing is just interacting with people, mostly on social media. We realize that a lot of people use social media for multiple things. And remember, we are still looking at the effect of COVID. We know that there are some women's income dipped, others excelled. We realized that the reasons for this were varied. depending on the sector, depending on adherence to like social distancing rules, and some found success. So something that was very, very strong as we're talking to the ladies was that COVID enabled several things. One, changing like the societal perceptions of the work, and then it also enabled other people to find new ways of getting a market. So that was very, very interesting. And for those who whose income dipped, some of them to cope, obviously through their savings. Some of them had like support from their spouses, and some of them even ventured into new sectors. So the question on this is, after we talked to all these women, is which woman? We know that women are not a homogeneous group, so we cannot just lump them up as one. We know that they have diverse interactions, that this ultimately determines their choice in the sector. It also determines the time they can allocate on the work they do. And this ultimately affects their earnings. So we saw that women have like a differentiated journeys, and they have different opportunities, which also which will ultimately determine who succeeds, when and why, who struggles, and how do they cope. And we also wanted to see who is not present and why is this person not present. Remember, I said we are looking at it from the perspective of people who are in the urban areas and also in the rural areas. Remember, only 20% are in urban and peri-urban areas. And when it comes to women, is that number still the same? So we wanted to center everything on the woman. How is it different being a woman, let's say, selling online, or a woman using digital platforms to earn, versus a woman who's doing it offline? What are the differences? What are the similarity? What is the perceived power that a woman may or may not gain even as they use digital platforms? So that was the crux of this research, and this is something that I think we really need to ask, even as we are looking at it from the policy point of view. We're looking at it from the platforms point of view. So as platforms come and bring in more women, are they considering and asking the question, which woman, which woman would excel, who is left behind? Even as platforms are trying to bring in more and more women to like the digital space. So when we looked at this, we created like a sort of like a framework trying to see what issues and what intersectionalities are we getting. We realized that, one, we can see there are women who are, we look at it from a marital status point of view. There are some who are single. They are what they want from this is to gain at least a bit of financial independence. We realize that some are single parents. For them, in addition to just getting financial independence, it's also the need to cater for their family's needs now that they have a young one to support. Some of them are married. For this, it's the need to also supplement the income of their spouse. And all this ultimately determines sometimes which sector they would join. For the married women, some of them would seek permission from their spouse to even join some sectors. So how do those things affect the women? So asking that question, which woman, is very, very key. In addition to that is what kind of family support do these women have? Remember, we talked about the social norms, and I know Pat mentioned a bit about this. There are some stereotypes and barriers that would prevent women from sort of like joining different platforms, or they would determine which platform is maybe suitable for a certain woman and maybe not suitable for others. When you look again at the woman, which woman is this? Does she have caregiving responsibilities? Is her home set up comfortable enough to help her achieve her goals? Questions like that are needed to be asked, even when you're considering and looking at it from a gendered perspective. in terms of age, what we realize is that the younger women, for them, flexibility is something that is key, and flexibility is a selling point for them. Unfortunately, from the interviews that we had, flexibility for older women, mostly those ones above the age of 30, who may have a different marital status, they may have children, they may have other caregiving roles, they may have like a family to support. So and some of them, especially the older ones, would have a preference maybe for one platform to maximize on their earnings. Also, something that was interesting when it came up, the effect of being a firstborn on earnings, because firstborn would have to redistribute their earnings to ensure that their family is also able to get money for to be supported by what they will be able to be supported. Another thing is, where do they come from? Are they in an urban town or urban areas where we have more prevalence of digital platforms, or are they in a rural town where there are no digital platforms? So what are they using? So this also limits or would either limit women from participating or using digital platforms, and or will determine which platforms these women would ultimately use. Another thing is this woman a person living with disabilities? Can they access these platforms? What as they access their platforms, how do these platforms suited for the women? Can they be able to use them? Can they be able to continuously earn despite their disability? And what are their coping mechanisms? For this one, probably you have to know what type of disabilities exist and how do they affect the people. So it's a whole, you have to understand the different intersectionalities of women. It's just not bringing women on board, but you have to understand what is their journey. Remember, not every woman is the same. A rural woman is totally different from someone who's in the urban areas, and those are the things that we need to really look into when it comes to the issues of women using digital platforms. The other thing is are they digitally literate? Are they able to use these platforms? Are they exposed even to the platforms? Do they have probably even access to digital technology? Do they know how to even market themselves online? Because even in the discussions that we had with the different ladies that we interviewed, this was something that was coming up. How can I market myself better? So a lot of digital literacy skills that are needed. So the more exposed the lady or the woman is, the better their chances of earning more are. And finally, what other supports do they have? This was mainly on things like community, what offline or online groups exist to help them grow their business. I know Patricia mentioned something around this. What mentorship? What mentorship are they receiving? Do they have? Are they trained? Are they consistently getting training for as they work? So those are the things that were coming out from the research. So again, as we continue looking at this, the question still comes: so what? Okay, so what do women want? You have talked to a bunch of women. So what are they saying? Yes, women are not a homogeneous group. So what else can we do? And what do women want? We realize that one of the most important things is at least having like a dignified work, dignity at work. So looking at their safety and security. This is for different sectors. Some sectors require more safety and needs to be more secure for women. Some of them, something else on dignity was the support they receive from the platforms, especially when it comes to complaints. Are their complaints going to be heard? yeah, those were things that were really coming out when it comes to looking at dignity. Are they be able to get the payment in time, even according to the agreed conditions? What other things are they facing, even as they use digital platforms like social media? In this, it was a lot of cyberbullying was prevalent. There was also harassment. So how can some of these issues be tackled? Because some of them complained there was little redress when it comes to that. So the second thing that was key is women trying to push back despite the societal norms. But this is not as simple as just saying it like that. It requires a mindset shift, and also understanding that it's a differentiated trajectory. It's not just one path for all women. Women are different. As when we acknowledge that and we understand that it has to be a different trajectory, helping them achieve or get to that place would be probably the next frontier when it comes to trying to push back on some of the norms. And this was mostly prevalent for people who are motorcycle drivers, because it's a sector that is very, it's like a man's world. It's very male oriented as compared to the other sectors. The third thing was Ubuntu, where it's mostly community for everything and everywhere. So in this, we learned that women are using a lot of online groups, even offline, for training, support, mentorship still came out as something that is strong, even inspiration for getting groups and even trading. I remember when we were doing the WhatsApp conversations, the weekly WhatsApp conversations in the WhatsApp group, this was something that came out very strongly when women were coming in for to just discuss about their businesses. People would ask questions on how best to position their businesses. So that was something that was very key and very strong that came out from this work. Then the final thing is, as we talk about access, we should look at access as it being beyond just a device, having a device, or even having capital to even start a business. When it comes to access, there's still a lot of things that we need to consider, we need to put in place to ensure that women are able to get the most from digital platforms. There's the issue of mentorship to help move your business. And I know also Pat mentioned that, and Maureen also mentioned that, and Maureen kept on saying she needed to learn and unlearn and relearn. So that is something that came up when it comes to access, beyond just having the device, beyond just having the capital. Things women need also mentorship, and the other thing is digital literacy. That is a consistent topic. People hear about different digital platforms, but are they able to use them? Are they able to know, okay, after using them, this is how now I can position my business better? The other thing is the access to information. People hear about the different ways they could position their business, but now moving their business to the next level becomes a really, really, really big problem. And finally, even as I open this to our panelists, I can open up to the panelists part, Nanjira. The one quote I will leave you with is from someone that we interviewed. So she says, "It hits me that my TL, my timeline is my TL. The algorithm has it tailored to me." So clearly, even if I wanted a man to experience my experience, they will never, because their timeline is their timeline. Sometimes, in as much as we have digital platforms and in as much as we are using digital platforms, sometimes the way women look at it is a bit different, probably because of how the algorithm has been set up. So I think I will hand it over to Mbugua to take questions from or comments from the panelists. Thank you.
Fantastic piece of work, Nasubo. And like, Savita's just said in the comment section, great work deconstructing, women. Because when you unpack it like that, then it becomes apparent that there's so many layers that, even speaking on my own behalf, like you don't get to see that, you don't get to appreciate it. Now it actually makes you see all these platforms and what they're supposed to do from a different sort of perspective. So I'd like to welcome the panelists in any order to chime in on their thoughts, and maybe just for 5 minutes, keep it short and sweet, and then I could take on some questions.
Super. I'd like to go in quite quickly. I loved Nasubo, the report, and of course we were together when we were doing the gig work and listening to on the platforms. And I just want to reiterate that I think when it comes to social platforms, one of the things that women particularly enjoy, I have to say, is the peer-to-peer learning, the sharing of questions that they may have, and they feel that it's a safe place where other women will want to support them and share. I mean, as recently as, was it 2 days ago, on a group that Maureen and I and Shiko are on, somebody was having a challenge of, should I change my career? I'm struggling with, with just trying to, she was a teacher and she's struggling to try and, just get a job. And honestly, the value of the advice that she was given on the group, even for me, I found it just actually quite amazing, and broken down with no assumptions to, just how to start, what business should I go in, etc. And I think that's one of the values of, I think, the WhatsApp groups for women in business, where, especially the smaller groups, where there's a much more deeper interaction. And we're seeing it as well in Kayana, when we were on the bigger groups, because many of the members are already members of other Biashara groups. I think the thing that they appreciate the most, then it all just boils down to this peer-to-peer learning, sharing of ideas, sharing of opportunities, and then how to don't only just send a link to an opportunity, actually sit together with 2 or 3 other women and fill in the form and apply for the opportunity. And I think this is something that is very unique, I feel, for women specifically. And the nurturing and the supportiveness of doing business, at least for now, is what is working. As we get maybe more and more women in business, it might become a little bit more aggressive or a little bit more tighter. But I think for now, because we are all in this journey as very young entrepreneurs, it's something that is working very well for women. I really like that. Around the safety, security, and support, I think this is especially on when I talked a little bit about women who, when you ask them to go online, so 50% of the women in our network will probably have a business that has a website. The other 50, if you begin to interrogate the reason why they're not online, it is really, really the fear of the bullying and, just being pulled down and dragged down by how the social networks can be. And as a result, it goes through even to networks like maybe LinkedIn, where you're like, surely what bullying is happening on LinkedIn, but they still feel, no, that's a social network and I shouldn't even be there as a business at all. So there's a lot of unlearning that we have to do for women. And then just, we're hoping that now with what we've been seeing with TikTok and Instagram being asked to, to be more stringent on the back-end controls when it comes to cyberbullying, we hope we'll begin to see more and more women embrace, the social platforms. I also love the conversation around the urban woman and versus the rural woman. And while we have seen a lot of WhatsApp conversations happening, I'm not so sure about the quality of the messaging when it comes to some of the wider, I'd say, WhatsApp, not necessarily the Biashara groups, but just general groups. And maybe that also makes it adverse. I remember one of the ladies saying how she doesn't use her WhatsApp for business, but that's just for friends and family and sharing thoughts. But Instagram was more her choice of app. Now, if we can't even get them onto WhatsApp for business, then there's no way more sophisticated platforms will will be embraced and used in the way they're supposed to be used. So yes, there is a divide in how the platforms are being used and who's using them and who's reaping the most benefit from the use of the platforms. Thank you, Nasubo. That was really, really insightful.
Thanks, Patricia. Any other panelists who wants to have a go at that feedback before we get into Q&A?
Sorry, Maurice. I'd like to chime in just really quick. Two points for me. One is refreshing to hear what the direction seems to be with regards to specifically focusing on women. Many times, and especially in the space in which majority of us are in the tech and innovation space, when we talk about tech, we talk about it as an enabler. But then now you begin to see when you talk about these different demographics, whether women, whether people with disabilities, that tech could actually be the biggest stumbling block to people actually being included in spaces and being able to do things. So I like that is beginning to come out, and I hope that the final production makes this even more clear that we need to pay attention to how tech is being used and whether it truly includes the people that you're wanting to include. The second thing is, that's overwhelming when you begin to deconstruct, exactly which woman are we talking to. It's so overwhelming. Even myself, having been in the tech and innovation space for over 10 years, I begin to question, man, have I done anything? And I can imagine someone coming into the space, even someone that's running an e-commerce platform, is saying, man, all I wanted was to run an e-commerce platform and people to buy things, and then I deliver them. Now you're telling me there's 100 different kinds of women, and that I need to to be cognizant of that as I'm building out my tool. But I think what's important to remember is that you can't work in isolation. And the whole point is that you need to build an ecosystem around your product. So whether it's about paying attention to say health and the cover and so on, and how to make sure that the people that work with you or use your platform have a decent living. There's some things you might decide would be a core part of your product, but then there's also other things that you go to other people for. So I can already see in the chat that there's people that may be going to Kayana to just try and get themselves into the space of being female entrepreneurs. There's hubs that you can go to learn digital skills, and so there's all this support that people can get, that organizations can get, to be able to cater to these different dynamics, different groups of women without necessarily needing to break bank. So I just wanted to put that out there, and I know there's people listening that are overwhelmed by everything that Nasuko spoke about. So yeah, thank you. That's it.
Thanks, Nekesa. Maurice, you had something to say? Then we can go into Q&A.
Oh, okay, sorry. For me, it's almost to play devil's advocate on the awesome work that some of the platforms have enabled, right? They have brought in, democratized and broken the silos for people to find more market, for more business. But the other thing that I'm also just wary of is that these are very sophisticated platforms that you're talking about, and they also have an adverse effect, some of which have been mentioned here. And I do think that whoever, and we as Baraza are still working on the framework on how do we address that as an institution. But I think it also needs to be a concerted effort from the players who want to sort of like mitigate the challenges that the platforms are facing. I mean, you look at issues from like misinformation, disinformation, cyberbullying, privacy, government overreach sometimes. So it's a lot of things that the platforms sometimes also bring a challenge onto. And I just think my parting shot is it cannot be a one organization solution to sort of like solve for this the platform side. How do I say effects, right? The bad effects that come with the platforms. I'm part of Facebook Accelerator mentors for Facebook Accelerator community mentors, and one of the members who's there is Dr. Elizabeth Walla, who has a very huge platform for travelers, right? But then she talks about how sometimes the platform will be toxic in the sense that people go onto the comment section and body shame people, or sometimes call out in vulgar language about politicians. So issues like that. The platform is helping people to discover Kenya and discover travel, which is a very good thing. And that's what we do need for especially people who are using these platforms for sustainability. But on the other side, it has very adverse effects. So just keep that in mind, everyone who's here, and finding solutions that are more sophisticated, but also in a concerted way.
Thanks, Maurice. I'm cognizant of time because many people had, earmarked the 2 hours we had set aside for this. I'll let, Maureen give us a final take on the gender lens perspective, and then we'll take, the 3 questions and wrap it up. So, Maureen?
I think I'd like to really emphasize, really from a genderless perspective, and it's good that the woman was deconstructed in this report, because when I was starting Nyayo Mums, it's a platform that I had run for a very long time, and then I put structures around it. But I think when we were doing the WhatsApp weekly conversations, I went back and I had a lot of assumptions, because I had to go back and really interrogate some of the assumptions I had made around middle class. But then those discussions just empowered me that I can be able to really humanize the support that we give, because I think that's a very critical bit for women. I think women really like the human-centered approaches, and I think I'd really like to emphasize that as you're building the platforms for women, it's also important for us to really, from a gender perspective, is to really empathize more with women because of the uniqueness there are in their different journeys. That's really my parting shot.
Thank you very much, Maureen. Dr. Shiko, I think I'll pick just the 3 questions from the Q&A section, and then the panelists could answer, and then we could hand it over to you. There's Bundi, who had a question for Patrick and asked, what's your perspective on unionizing the gig economy? So that's the first question to Patrick. And then May asked what I'll consider a general question on taxation, about how do we identify, or are there any opportunities to optimize your taxation exposure, especially where there's a quote unquote gray area. We know of the DST and everything. And again, the last question from May is, what does the platform economy look like from the rural perspective? A lot of this activity happens in the urban area. So what does this look like from the rural perspective, given that the report said it had focused on 10 counties? So starting off with Patrick, and then for the other 2, any panelists could answer. Then Dr. Shiko, it will be over to you.
Well, thank you, Bogo, and thank you, Teresis, for the question. I think in terms of unionizing, I would probably say organizing, not unionizing. Organizing is a first step, and I think the opportunity still holds for young people and online workers, gig workers, to think and look for channels and ways in which they can be able to build their collective capital. I think we have a few that are attempting to come together, but then when you come, to online work, it's individual. It's highly, as you were saying, democratizing finding work. The gig work does not render itself to being under a particular institution or arm. So I think it would require some new way of thinking in order for online workers, gig workers, etc., to find channels and avenues. And one of the ways is pretty much to use the internet, the same way that they work, the same way that they seek their opportunities and advance and do marketing. They are the most versatile, in fact, when it comes to navigating the internet. So that could be one of the ways they can mobilize and look for ways to add voice and have a voice to that effect. It's just one of my ideas.
Thanks, Patrick. For the taxation one and the reach in terms of what's happening in the rural area, who'll take that?
So I'll take okay, go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, let me take, because I have to jump off to another meeting, but very quickly on the rural one. So I mean, the concept of the gig economy is not foreign to rural areas. It's only that a lot of these interactions are happening offline. So if you think about the portfolio of work, a discussion that I, brought up earlier, it's very much, present in rural areas. If you think about the seasonality of agriculture, for example, you have, like people going into, moving into jobs, during harvesting periods, where, there's demand for, like labor at those times, if it's the planting season, etc. So a lot of that is happening on offline. And similarly, like you have young people transitioning between hustles. At one point they're trying to sell something, at another they are, doing some wage labor, etc. So that continues to exist online. Now, the challenge, and this is what we pose to innovators and the ecosystem in general, is how do we shift a lot of these interactions to online platforms? Because what we are seeing so far is a concentration on urban areas and the digital savvy population. And what that takes is one, like investing in that infrastructure in the rural areas. Sort of improving, that workforce readiness, that digital savviness, sort of imparting digital skills amongst young people in rural areas to help them, understand and participate and appreciate, digital platforms in general. So there's a big opportunity in rural areas that can be leveraged, but it will also take like a lot of efforts from innovators. So if you look at a platform like Copia, right now they're doing such great work in rural areas, whereas a couple of years ago, every e-commerce platform would ignore, rural areas and focus on urban areas. So that's how it's playing out. Thank you.
Thank you. The one on taxation.
So I think the one on taxation, Maureen had already answered in terms of what taxation are there. But so there was a huge, early in the year, there was a huge conversation around the digital tax and how it might apply or not might apply to local gig workers. And I mean, there's so many fine prints. At the beginning, even I don't think the KRA understood what they were asking. But as the conversation went ahead, they have refined what digital tax is. And I don't think gig workers are fined apart from your total, what is it called? Your normal income tax, unless you're using like other platforms to get money. So for example, if you're using Netflix to show videos, Netflix will tax you. If you're using Facebook or PayPal, they will tax you. But usually it's just your income tax that is taxed, and the withholding tax is like 5%. Yeah, it's just a consultancy fee, 5% above the 25,000 shillings if you earn that over a month. So I think that was well covered. Yeah.
Great. Then, Dr. Shiko, it's over to you for the closing remarks. I think it's been a fantastic session. I'd like to say a big thanks to all the panelists, solid inputs and analysis on the 104-page report. I keep discovering new stuff every day as I go through it. So it's not like it's like a magazine, those parents' magazines that from the days of yore that you could read for years and years. I think fantastic document, and thank you for all your insights and your time. I should go over to you.
Thank you. I'm sorry, my camera for some reason is not working. Initially, I was using my phone to connect, but my phone is busy. So I want to say thank you, everyone, so much for being part of this and reaffirming that this is like needed work and reading through the 104 pages and giving us so much insight. Thank you to each and every panelist for reading it, writing commentaries, and coming to comment on commentaries here. I'm really, really grateful. I want to just say a big kudos and shout out to the Caribou team. They're here. Some of them have left. They've been interacting in the comment section. Thank you for entrusting us with this piece of work. I'm glad that we've gotten this kind of reception in the market. So thank you so much to the Caribou team for just entrusting us with this. And I also want to thank, of course, the audience. Everyone who was here. We had so many people, so we had a bet in the team on how many people are going to come to the what is it called, to the panel, and I was beaten. I have to buy Josephine, who is our social media manager, something because of just the fantastic work she has done in making sure that everybody is here and managed well. I want to say thank you to Mtoto News. Mtoto News is our partner when it comes to webinars and live streaming, because that's their core. They do media and events. And of course, I want to say Patrick and your team at Mastercard, thank you for trusting that you have something to do with the continent, and you can trust people to feed into your policy and programs. And I want to say so much thank you. And of course, I want to say thank you to the team, Nasubo, Tessie, Baraka, and Josephine, who have been like at the forefront of this project, and Anne and Fred, who've been running this project and talking to the different gig workers and running across the country to collect this information. Thank you so much. And just to plug in, Patrick, to answer your question, this is the first report. So we are currently in Kitale, in Eldoret, and Nakuru doing a fully rural forecast study on this. So the results of this will be out early 2022. So wait for that. The gender one, we are wrapping up again early 2022. You should be able to read this report on gender and others that we are working on. So thank you very much, and have a fantastic rest of your day and weekend and coming weekend. Thank you, and God bless you.
Yeah.